So people, ask me, with tears in their eyes, Steve, I have so much trouble in my intimate relationships. What can I do? And one of the first things I move to tell them is, please be compassionate with yourself. That because usually there's lots of voices of self-judgment. I'm such a failure. No one will ever love me. I'm such a brute or whatever. And to have compassion, and to, first of all, to remember that this is how we're conditioned. We are conditioned, growing up in a dominator culture, to take on these violent, painful ways of thinking and relating. That our natural way of relating is mostly to be gentle and tender and compassionate and loving with each other. But through the training that we get in a dominator culture, it's systematically learned out of us. We are systematically learned out of us about how to be gentle, kind, empathetic, and loving with each other. Obviously not entirely, but to a large degree. So, for example, look at a classroom. Right? A classroom is like a perfect example of how things are learned out of us. So, instead of like naturally alive children who are in touch with their bodies and live out of their bodies, school, you get sat in a chair and you have to learn to sit there for hours at a time. Well, obviously there's breaks in between, but for hours in a day, you sit there and you have to learn to be still. Now, there's nothing wrong with learning to be still, but it's such an emphasis. And so we learn to be disconnected from our bodies. We learn to go up in our heads. And what are we going up into our heads? We're going up into our heads to learn what the authority tells us we should learn. So the message is very clear. Disconnect from your body. Go up into your head. Learn about what's right and what's wrong. Learn to be obedient to authority. Learn to look to outside of you for guidance. And not to operate from the inside out. So that's one thing we're learning. That's creates a lot of difficulty for us being happy human beings. Like, what else are we learning? Well, we're also learning that my self-worth depends upon whether that authority figure tells me that I did it right or not, whether I'm a good person or not, whether I'm smart or not. So instead of learning to operate from the inside out, am I happy? Am I feeling fulfilled with the choices in my life? I'm learning to operate. Am I being validated, accepted, approved of by the authorities? So that creates a whole other wave of difficulty. And then there's my self-worth, my value, my belonging depends on my competition with the other people in the class, or in the class, or in whatever circles that I'm in. So then you have this competition thing, that my happiness is dependent upon if I'm a winner. This whole concept of I'm a loser or a winner, rather than, again, coming back to what's the most natural thing is, am I feeling content and full and satisfied? Am I doing what nature has put in me to do to contribute back to life? That's what gives us satisfaction. Am I flinging my gifts back into the world and receiving other people's gifts as they fling to me? That excitement and aliveness that is natural to being human gets squashed by these ways that we learn to be in dominator culture, and school is one of the main places that we learn that. It's not the only place. Look at advertising. Advertising is basically the same thing. My self-worth depends upon whether I look a certain way, have a certain stuff, and then those values get pumped into our head, and then we talk to each other that way. We criticize each other for, not looking right, dressing right, whatever, body shapes and all those kinds of things. And so, what's the antidote? The antidote is what we talk about in nonviolent communication, that Marshall Rosenberg spent his life, he called it emotional liberation. Learning how to free ourselves from the internalized oppression. It's an internalized oppression that we have picked up from the culture, that I'm going to go through life guiding my decisions by what people or forces outside of me say that I should do. And instead, I learn to be connected to my feelings, which are my guidance system to thriving, because nature wants me to thrive. Connect to my feelings, which tell me moment by moment, are my needs getting met? Including my need to, especially my need to contribute to life. But am my needs getting met or not? So I learn to feel my feelings, use that guidance to connect to my needs, whether my needs are being met or not, and how to relate to each other from this empathic place. So instead of the poison of judging and blaming and competing, we regain the natural aliveness, this fuel that is the most powerful fuel for the human psyche, is the fuel of gratitude, the celebration of life. And we reconnect to that energy within ourselves and with each other, and we become powerful forces for creating a world of beauty and pleasure and justice.